Alright, hello everyone, how are you all doing? So today I'll be discussing the solutions to Codeforces round 747, and I'll be discussing the first 6 problems, that is starting from A and down to E2. So this was again another really interesting rounds, and I don't really have any complaints. The problems were really good. So yeah, let's just get right into it, and let's start with problem A. So this is a really simple problem. So what they're asking us is we need to find two integers L and R such that the sum of all the numbers from L to R is equals to n. So we have a number n in the input, and we need to give two numbers L and R such that the sum of all the numbers in the range from L to R is equal to n. But the thing which makes this problem easy is that we are allowed to use negative numbers, and yeah, so basically what we can do is every time we can output something like L is equals to minus of n minus 1 and R is equals to n, and what that does is all the numbers from minus of n minus 1 to plus of n minus 1 just cancel each other, and we are left with just n. So yeah, that's the solution to this problem. We can simply output L is equals to minus of n minus 1 and R is equals to n. Let's just look at the code, and I also complicated this problem a little bit, and I made two cases, that is when n is even and when n is odd, which is not really required. So this line works for all the cases. You just output minus of n minus 1 and n, and you have your solution. So yeah, a really easy problem, and I think I should get moving. And now let's talk about the problem B. This was an interesting problem, and let's see what this problem is saying. So we are calling a positive number special if it can be written as a sum of different non-negative powers of n. So for example, for n is equals to 14, the number 17 is special because 17 can be written as 4 raised to the power 0 plus 4 raised to the power 2. But 9 cannot be written like that in any way using powers of 4, right? So yeah, this is how you find out a special number, and what you want to do is you want to find the kth special number, right? You are given an n and a k, and you need to find the kth special number modulo 10 raised to 9 plus 7, of course, because the values of n and k are huge, so the kth special number indeed can be huge. So we need to find this value modulo 10 to the 9 plus 7, and to solve this problem, let's make a few observations, right? Let's try to write down all the special numbers for n is equals to 3, right? So for n is equals to 3, what we have is the powers of 3 are something like this. So we have 0, then 3, then 9, then 27, then 81, and so on. So the first special number is going to be 1, which is 3 raised to the power 0. This should be 1. And the second special number is going to be 3. And the third special number is going to be 3 plus 1, which is 4. And the next number is going to be nothing but 9. And I notice that the next number is going to be 10. And then we have something like 13, and this just goes on, right? Now what you notice is, let's divide this into segments. So I'm dividing everything into segments. So let's say this 1 is a separate segment for me. Let's say these 3 and 4 are a separate segment, and let's say that this 9, 10 and 13 is a separate segment, right? I'll also add a 14 here, which is going to be the next number. Oh, I'm sorry. So after 10 we'll get 12, and then we'll get 13. So let's say these 4 are a different segment, and I'll just keep dividing all the special numbers into segments like this. Now what you notice is the first segment has one number, the second segment is of size 2, the third segment is of size 4, and if you just keep doing this, you'll realize that the next segment is of size 8, then 16, and so on. So it is really just powers of 2 which is going on here. And if you are not able to notice the pattern, you can also realize this observation, and that is, if you fix the highest power of n which you are taking, for example, if I fix the highest power of 3 as 2, that is 9, then what I have is two smaller powers, which is 1 and 3. So for each of them I really have two choices, either to take them or to not take them, right? So 2 into 2 will give me 4, and that is exactly the size of my segment containing the maximum power as 9, right? So really what the segment is signifying is the maximum power of n which I am taking. So in this first segment the maximum power is just 0, in this second segment the maximum power is 1, and in this third segment the maximum power is 2. So the observation is the size of the segment having a maximum power of n as some m is 2 raised to the power m, right? Yeah, so if a number has a maximum power of n as m, then the size of the segment containing all the numbers having maximum power of n is equals to m is going to be 2 raised to the power m. So really what happens is, to find the kth special number, we will find the highest power of n in it and keep doing it recursively. So if I just keep doing it, I will finally get to my kth smallest number, right? Kth special number. And that is exactly what I am doing in my code. And this is the entire solution to the problem. It was a really nice problem. Let's just look at the code once. So instead of using recursion, I am taking a while loop and I am iterating until my k is not equals to 0. And what I am doing is I am finding the greatest power of 2, which is less than or equals to k. And there is a very special and nice function in C++ which you can utilize to do it, which is the built-in CLZ function. And what it does is it counts the number of leading zeros in the binary representation of a number which is passed as an argument, and if you subtract it from 31, you will get what you are looking for, that is the highest power of 2, which is less than or equals to k. So yeah, this is that line, and I am simply adding the power of n raised to the power that number to my answer, and I am subtracting k by 2 raised to the power temp, and this will just keep happening until my k becomes 0, and finally I'll be left with my kth special number, right? So yeah, this is the entire solution to problem B. And right, so let's keep moving, and now let's move to problem C. Again, it was an observation based problem, not very difficult to solve. So here we are given with a string of length n, and what we can perform certain operations, and in one operation what we can do is we can choose a number x which ranges from 1 to n, and for every position I which is not a multiple of x, we can just replace it with any other character of our choice in the string, right? And what we need to do is we need to make all the characters of the string equal to a certain character c which is given to us, and yeah, that is our goal. So the first observation here is, if the string is already equal to the required string, then we don't need to do any operation, then our answer will be just 0. And we need to output the minimum number of operations as well as all the operations that we are doing, that is all the numbers x which we are choosing in every operation, right? So yeah, so let's make a few observations here. So now I'll come to problem C. So the observation here that I'm going to make is, I can always achieve my target in using at most 2 operations. So we can always achieve target in at most 2 operations. Now why is that happening? And that is happening because if we choose x equals to n, then we are really converting all the numbers, all the positions from 1 to n minus 1 in just one operation, because we know that any number from 1 to n minus 1 cannot be a multiple of n, right? So if we, in our first operation, if we choose x equals to n, we'll convert the entire string into all c's, just barring the last character, and if the last character is not already equal to C, then we can use one extra operation to convert it to C. And we can always do that because there will be at least one number in 1 to n minus 1 which is not a factor of n, because obviously not all the numbers from 1 to n minus 1 can be a factor of n. So yeah, in this way we can always do it in two operations, that is choose x equals to n in first operation and then choose x in 1 to n minus 1 such that x is not a factor of n, and using that you can always do it in two operations. So now we have taken care of the cases when we can do it in 0 operations or 2 operations. The only thing which is left to do is to check whether we can do it in one operation or not, right? And let's see how to do that. So we can do what we want in one operation if and only if there is a number which is not a factor of any of the positions, right? So there are certain positions which are already equal to ch, which is the target character, and there are the rest of the positions which are not equal to ch. So we are really interested in those positions which are not equal to c, and if there is a number which is not a factor of any of those positions, then we can use that number and achieve our target in just one operation, right? So if there exists a number which is not a factor of any of the position I such that Si is not equals to C, then we can achieve the target in just one operation, right? So the question now arises, how do we check the existence of such a number, right? And that's not really difficult because the constraints are really low. So the constraints are up to 3 into 10 raised to the power 5, and an n root n solution will just pass here. Even though there is a way to do it in linear time as well as in n log n time using CEVA-Pareto theme, but for simplicity what we can do here is we can just iterate over all the factors of all the positions which are not equal to C and just mark them, and towards the end if we get any number from 1 to n minus 1 which is not marked, we can just use it and achieve the target in one operation. So yeah, this completes this problem. There are really 3 cases when we can do it in 0, 1 and 2 operations, and they are not very hard to notice. Let's just look at the code once. So yeah, this is the code. Initially I am pushing all the positions where s of I is not equals to C into my vector, and if there is no such position, then obviously I can do it in 0 operations, and this is just an extra case which was not really necessary. So if the last character is not equals to C, then I can choose just n and do it in one operation, but this if condition was not really required because my code really takes care of this case. Now what I am doing is I am taking a count for each number, and for each position which is not equal to C, I am iterating over all the factors in root n time, and I am incrementing the count of all the factors, right? And finally if I get a number whose count is 0, then I can just use that number and achieve my target in just one operation, and that is what I am doing. So if I find such a number, then I will just achieve my target in one operation, otherwise it will take me 2 operations, and when it takes me 2 operations, then the first operation is going to be x equals to n, and the second operation is going to be with the number which is not a factor of n, and this is what I am doing to find that number. And yeah, so in this way in n root n time I have solved this problem, even though there are faster methods, but they were not really required because the constraints were low. So yeah, that is it for problem C. So let's keep moving, and I'll be doing problem E1 before problem D because E1 was really an easy problem. I mean, it could have simply been A instead of E1, it was that easy. So let's look at it. So essentially what we are given is we are given a binary tree which is a perfect binary tree, that is all the nodes have exactly 2 children and there are k levels. So in a perfect binary tree having k levels, there are 2 raised to the power k minus 1 nodes, right? And we need to color all the nodes of the binary tree, and what we have is 6 colors as in a Rubik's cube, and for every color there are 2 other colors which cannot be adjacent to it, and there are 4 colors which can be adjacent to it, and this condition holds for all the 6 colors. So all these lines can be all these lines can be just compressed into a statement that all the colors have 4 colors which can be put adjacent to it and 2 colors which cannot be, right? And what I want to know is the number of ways of coloring the tree, and there is no node which is already colored, so that is a good thing for us, which makes this problem even really easy. So let's look at how to do it. It's really not that difficult. So let's see what the tree is going to look like. Let's say we have a tree like this. Let me just draw another level here. Right, so let's say we have a tree like this, and so what we really want to do is we need to color all the nodes, and there are really no other limitations other than the adjacency condition. So the number of ways in which we can color this particular node is 6, right? Because we have 6 choices for this node. And similarly, I have colored the root. So basically there is a particular color in the root, and if I am at this particular node, then the only limitation I have is the root, and the root will be of one color. So there are really only 4 other colors which can be adjacent to it. So I have 4 choices here, and similarly I will have 4 choices here. Similarly I am going to have 4 choices here, right? So I am going to have 4 choices here, 4 choices here, 4 choices here, and so on, right? Because for any node the only limitation I have is of its parent, and its parent has been colored with a node, and so my node is adjacent to its parent, so it can be either of the 4 colors which are allowed to be adjacent to its parent. So essentially what happens is the root has 6 choices and all other nodes have 4 choices. So my answer is just going to be 6 into 4 raised to the power other nodes. So I have total 2 raised to the power k minus 1 nodes and 1 root, so the other nodes are just going to be 2 raised to the power k minus 2. So essentially what my answer is, it's just 6 into 4 raised to the power 2 raised to the power k minus 2, and we just need to calculate this value modulo 10 raised to the 9 plus 7 and we are done. So yeah, that is the solution to problem E1. The only tricky part here is to notice that we don't need to do 2 raised to the power k modulo 10 raised to the 9 plus 7, because that would be wrong, because a raised to the power b modulo m is not equals to a raised to the power, so a raised to the power b raised to the power c, a raised to the power b raised to the power c modulo m is not equals to a raised to the power b raised to the power c modulo m, right? These two are different quantities. So I need to calculate the exact value of 2 raised to the power k minus 2, and then I need to take 4 raised to the power that exact value into 6 modulo 10 raised to the 9 plus 7, and that is why a lot of people got wrong answer on pretest 5 for this problem, and this is the thing that they were missing. So let's just look at the code for once. So yeah, I am pre-computing all the values of 2. You can compute them on the fly, it doesn't matter. And finally what I am doing is the power is 2 raised to the power k minus 2, and I'm doing 4 raised to the power pw, and this pwr function calculates a raised to the power b modulo n, and finally I'm just multiplying it with 6, and that is my answer. Right, so this solves problem E1, and now we can come to the two most interesting problems. First one is going to be problem D, which was a really good problem, and then we'll be discussing problem E2, and which was really difficult as well. Yeah, so let's come to problem D now. So there is a very famous game which a lot of you were playing during this lockdown period, and it is called Among Us, and this problem is based on that. So basically what is happening is there are n players playing the game of Among Us, and what is happening is there are m comments in the chat box, and every comment is of the form every comment is of the form IJC, where which represents that the player I and player J, which represents that player I thinks that player J is of type C. I'll be elaborating on that, which means C can either be crewmate or imposter, and a comment of the type IJC means that the player I is saying that player J is a C. So if S is an imposter, then so if C is an imposter, then that will mean that player I thinks that player J is an imposter. Otherwise, it would mean player I thinks that player J is a crewmate or something like that. And another condition which is imposed here is that each player has exactly one role, which is an imposter or a crewmate. Also, an important thing to notice here is that an imposter will always lie, whereas a crewmate will always tell the truth. So these are the two very important things to notice in this problem. And yeah, so basically in the input we've been provided with the number of players and the number of comments, and what we need to tell is the maximum number of imposters that there can be, such that all the conditions are satisfied, right? So I need to assign the role of imposter or crewmate to every person such that all the comments become true, and the number of imposters is maximized, right? So in all the questions like this, where we are given stuff like that, where there is a relationship between two players, of course this hints towards forming a graph, right? So this is obviously a hint towards a graph problem, but again people can really complicate this problem thinking that it is a directed graph, right? Because the relationship only says that player I thinks player J is something. It doesn't say anything about what player J is thinking about player I, right? But as it turns out, this problem can be modeled as an undirected graph rather than a directed graph, and let's see how to do that. Right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write certain relationships. So before that, I will assign 0 and 1 values. So 0 means a crewmate, and 1 is going to mean an imposter. So with this assigned, let's see what a node in the graph is going to look like. So this is a graph. So these are two nodes, and if the player in this node thinks something about the player in this node, I can write it as an edge in the graph, and something like this. So this is X, this is Y, this is Z. So this can be written as X thinks Y is Z, right? So this is a relationship of that kind. So now I'm going to make a table, and let's see what happens, right? So I'll make a table for X and Z, and I'll see the result as Y, right? So the first case is when X is an imposter, and he thinks that Y is also an imposter, right? So in that case, Y turns out to be a crewmate because an imposter always lies. Okay. The second case is when X is an imposter and he thinks that Z is a crewmate. So in that case, Z turns out to be an imposter because again, an imposter will always lie. The third case is when X is a crewmate and he thinks that Z is a crewmate. So in this case, he will turn out to be a crewmate because a crewmate always tells the truth, and X is a crewmate. And the last case is when X is a crewmate and he thinks that Y is an imposter, and in this case Y will turn out to be an imposter because a crewmate never lies, right? So this is somewhat like a truth table, and if you look closely, this is nothing but the truth table of the bitwise XOR operation. Right? So yeah, this is the truth table of a bitwise XOR operation, which means any edge of the type x, y, z needs to satisfy a situation like this, needs to satisfy a condition which is, so any edge of the form x, z, y should satisfy the relation which is y is equals to the bitwise XOR of x and z, right? Right. So till now what we have realized is if we look at it as a directed graph, then it should satisfy this relation, right? But one thing to notice about the bitwise XOR is that bitwise XOR has an inverse property, right? So if I take the bitwise XOR of z on both sides, I'll be left with y bitwise XOR with z is equals to x, right? That means x XOR z should be equals to y, which just implies that y XOR z should also be equals to x, right? So rather than being a unidirectional relation, this relationship turns out to be bidirectional, right? So the relationship is bidirectional, which means we can form a rather undirected graph, right? And things are easy to handle using undirected graphs, and that makes our life really easy, right? So what we have is an undirected graph, and we need to maximize the number of imposters, or we need to tell that the statements contradict each other, right? So it's really easy now. We can just do a DFS on this graph, and if we come at a visited node, then we need to check whether the statements are consistent or not. And if it is not a visited node, then we can just keep assigning values, right? So what I'll do is I'll take an arbitrary route, and I will just arbitrarily pick whether to make it an imposter or a crewmate, and I will do a DFS. And once I'm done with my DFS, I'll have certain crewmates and certain imposters depending on whether I took my root node as an imposter or a crewmate, right? And there is another choice. So if I take my root node as an imposter, I will get certain value of the number of imposters and the number of crewmates. But if I actually reverse my decision and take my root node as a crewmate, then what will happen is all the nodes which were previously imposters will turn out to be crewmates, and vice versa, right? So essentially I can just do one DFS and take the maximum of the number of crewmates and imposters, and that is going to be my answer. And finally I'll check whether if I get a cycle, then I'll have to check whether whether the information is consistent or not, whether this property of XOR is satisfied or not, right? So yeah, the algorithm is simple. So do DFS, keep assigning roles according to the XOR property, and if you encounter a cycle, check for consistency, right? So this is the simple algorithm which can be used to solve this problem. The only challenge was to realize that we can actually make an undirected graph rather than a directed graph here, because the XOR has a self-inversing property which should be satisfied, right? So yeah, this is the entire algorithm for solving problem D. Let's just look at the code once. Right, so this is the code for problem D, and what I'm doing is I'm keeping a color vector for all the elements. So if an element is a crewmate, then I'm keeping its color as 0, and if it's an imposter, then I'm keeping its color as 0, and if it is not yet visited by my DFS, its color is going to be -1. So I take in the input as u, v and s, and I create an adjacency list for a directed graph like this, and then I iterate over all the nodes, and if the node is not yet visited, then I do a DFS from it, and I take maximums of count 1 and count 2, where count 1 denotes the number of imposters and count 2 denotes the number of crewmates. I am free to take their maximums because it all depends on the assignment of my ith node, right? If I choose to assign it with an imposter, then everything will be just reversed. So I am free to take the maximum, and finally if I get an inconsistency, then my answer is just going to be -1. And now let's see how I am checking for inconsistencies. So if the color of the first node, which is the adjacent node which I am at currently, uh, is that is equals to -1, that means that it hasn't been visited yet, right? And I mean, it is not equals to -1, that means it has been visited yet, and otherwise it hasn't been visited yet, right? So let's start from the beginning. In my DFS, I am passing the node function and the current state. So firstly, I color my current node using the state value which is being passed in the DFS, and if the state is 0, meaning that it is a crewmate, I increment the first counter, otherwise I increment the second counter, right? Now I traverse all the children of my current node, all the adjacent node of my current node, and if I see that this node has not been visited, I just do a DFS. But if I notice that it has already been visited, then I check for this XOR condition, right? This condition that x XOR z has to be equals to y. So if I find an inconsistency, that is x XOR z is not equals to y, then I do my OK as false and I just return, because I know that the answer is going to be -1. And if that's not the case, I just keep assigning the values, and finally this will just give me my answer. So yeah, this is problem D solved. It was a really interesting problem, and now let's move to the most challenging problem that I'll be discussing today, which is problem E2. So this is a 2300 rated problem, and it was really challenging for me to solve, but let's see how to do it. So it is just an extension of the problem E1, in which we have a complete binary tree, and we need to find the number of colorings. All the conditions are same, but the only extra restriction we have is this time there are certain nodes which are already colored. So in the input we have we have the value of the number of levels which we have in the binary tree, but we also have some nodes which are already colored, and the number of nodes which are already colored has to be less than equals to 2000. This is also given to us, and for each colored node we are given its color, right? So essentially all the nodes can be divided into two categories: the nodes which are not predefined and the nodes which are predefined, right? All right, so if we go back to the previous tree, let's go back to the previous tree. Right, so this is my tree, and let's try to make a few observations here. Let's say that the only node which is predefined is this one. So I'm saying that this is the only node which is predefined, right? So if this node is predefined, let's look at what happens to all the other nodes. So there is no means by which this particular node is getting affected by the predefined by this node being predefined. Similarly, there is no way this node is getting affected by this particular node being predefined, right? So if you just keep making observations like this, you'll realize that the only nodes which are getting affected by this node being predefined is the nodes which are in the path from it to the root. So these are the only nodes which are actually getting affected, because all the other nodes still have 4 choices, right? They have an ancestor, and the ancestor will be colored, and taking care of the restrictions of the ancestor, I'll have 4 choices for the current node, right? So all the nodes which are actually affected are the nodes which are on the path from my predefined node to the root. For all the other nodes, I'll have 4 choices, and it is being given to me in the question that there is at least one node which is predefined. That means my root will always be affected. So let's try to write down these observations. First of all, only those nodes in the path from a predefined node to the root are getting affected. Okay, and the second observation is the root is always getting affected. Okay, now let's see what can be the number of these nodes which are on the path from the root to any affected node. So I know that the number of predefined nodes has to be less than equals to 2000, and the path length from any node to the root can maximum be the number of levels in my tree, right? So really what is happening is the number of unique nodes that are getting affected will be less than equals to 2000 into 60, right? So that is another observation. The number of unique affected nodes is less than equals to 2000 into 60, which is nothing but 1.2 into 10 raised to the power 5, right? And this is not a very large number, and that makes our life easier because now we can apply some standard tree algorithms here, right? So basically we will remove all the nodes which are not affected and work on the remaining tree, right? So this makes our life really easy because now we have a standard tree of around 10 raised to the power 5 nodes in which we can apply some standard algorithms. But what about these nodes which we have removed? So if number of unaffected nodes is m, then this will simply contribute 4 raised to the power m to the answer, right? Because for any node which is not affected, I have its parent, and its parent will be colored with something, and so there are really 4 choices for my current node, right? And I already know that the root will always be affected, so I'm not taking the case where I have to account for a 6. So all nodes which are not affected will contribute 4 to the answer. So straight away I can just add 4 raised to the power m to my answer, and I can just remove all these nodes. So I'll be left with a tree which is having around 1.2 to 10 raised to the power 5 nodes, and now this is good for me, right? So I can do certain computations here, right? So really what I can do is I can solve this problem using dynamic programming. Once I have a tree which is small enough, I can use dynamic programming. So now I'll be using dynamic programming. So I'll make a 2D DP array. So where DP of ij will represent the number of ways of coloring the subtree of I by coloring the ith node with color j, right? So if I color the ith node with the particular color j, how many ways are there to color the subtree of I? That is what dp of ij will represent. And finally my answer will be nothing but summation of dp 1i for all I from 1 to 6, right? Because the first node can be colored in either of the 6 colors. So my final answer is going to be dp11 plus dp12 up till dp16, right? So this is easy to think about, but now let's see how do we make transitions, right? So we know that I have removed certain nodes from my tree, so the tree is no longer a perfect binary tree. So there are really a few cases which will arise here, right? Right. So a few cases are going to arise. That is, the first case is when when my particular node has both children, and another case is when my node has only one child, and the third case is when I have a leaf node which has no child, right? And I'll do the transitions in a different way for all the 3 cases. So yeah, let's try to make certain transitions. So I'm doing a DFS and calculating these DP values. So if I'm at a particular node, I have already calculated all the values for its children, if there are any. So I am free to use the DP values of its children to calculate, right? So uh, let's say I decide to color my current node with color I, and we know for any color I there is a list of four other colors which can be adjacent to it, right? So I'll have three cases as I discussed. The first case is when there are two children. The second case is just one child, and the third case is no child, right? And these three cases are arising because I am changing the structure of my tree, right? I am removing certain nodes, so the tree is no longer a perfect binary tree now. So yeah, these are the three cases, and let's see how to do transitions here. So really I will so let's look at the first case when there are two children, right? So when there are two children in my particular current node, what I can do is I will iterate on I will choose two colors which are allowed to be put adjacent to color I. And once I do that, I can just put the first color in the first child and the second color in the second child, and I'll be done, right? So let's say I choose two colors which are J and K. So I choose two colors which are J and K. Here J can also be equals to K. J can be equal to K, right? So what I'm doing is I'm using the color J for the first subchild and the color K for the second subchild. So really dp of cur node with color I, and to it I can add the product of dp of first child multiplied with the color J, dp of first child having color J multiplied with dp of second child having color K. So this is intuitive to understand because the number of so dp of current node having a color I will be added to itself, and the product of the dp of first node having the color J and the dp of second child having a color K. Let's see why this is happening first. So this case is something like this. I have a node here, I have its first child, I have its second child. So I want to color it with the color I, and there are really four colors which are allowed to be put adjacent to I, and let's say out of these four colors I choose two colors J and K, where J and K can be equal to each other. So if I find the number of ways of coloring this entire subtree having the root colored as J and coloring this entire subtree having the root colored K, then I can just simply multiply these two to get the answer for this entire subtree with the root colored I, right? So this is what I am doing in the first case, and yeah, so this is the first case sorted, and case 2 is really easy. I have just one child, so I will choose a J which is allowed to be put adjacent to I, then dp of cur node I would just be plus equals to dp of child J, right? So if you understood the first case, then understanding the second case is really obvious, right? And the third case is when I am at a situation where I don't have any child, and this just means that I am at a predefined node, right? So it can be possible that this node is not predefined, because if it is not predefined then it would have just been removed. So if it is predefined, then I'll just do dp of cur node and the color of cur node, which is already given to me in the input as 1, and all the other DP values would be 0. Right, so this completes all the transitions for my DP, and there are a few implementation details left in this problem, like how do we actually remove these nodes and how to make a DP array, because the number of nodes can be up to 10 to the 9. So let's see how to do it in the code. Right, so this is a fairly neat implementation of the problem, and let's see what I'm doing here. So firstly, I'm creating a map from string to integers, and I'm mapping all the strings to integers, which makes it easier to work with. So for all the colors, I have a certain integer, and with that done, according to the constraints given in the question, I am making allowed vectors. So allowed of 1 is nothing but all the colors which can be put adjacent to the white color. Allowed of 2 is all the colors which can be put adjacent to the yellow color, and so on. So this is the allowed vectors, and this is done. Now I know that for any node its parent is going to be on for any node x, its parent is going to be on the x by 2th node, and for any node x, its two children are always going to be on 2x and 2x plus 1. That is the general structure of a binary tree. So if you don't know how to implement a binary tree using an array, you should really learn that. It's not really difficult to do it. Now let's see what happens. So this num affected is the number of nodes which are getting affected. That is, they are a node on the path from a predefined node to the root. So I'm taking x, which is the predefined node, and I'm taking its color, right? So I'm making a tree array, and this tree array stores 3 values. If it is 0, then that node is not affected at all. If it is 1, then that node is affected, and if it is 2, then that means that the node is predefined, right? So this is the tree. It's not really an array because the numbers can be huge. That is why I'm using an unordered map, and that will just solve my problem. So yeah, I'm doing that, and I'm also taking a color array, color unordered map, and a color map only stores the colors of the predefined nodes. So I check whether the node is not affected at all. If it is not affected, then I increment the number of nodes which are affected, and I also mark this node as predefined, and finally I mark its color as MP of S, which I am defining here, right? So with that done, now what I do is I mark all the nodes which come on the path from this particular node to the root, and this can be done using this while loop, which is while x is greater than 0, that is because I can't surpass my root, and this tree of x equals to 0 just signifies that my node is not affected currently. If I just come at a node which is already affected, then I already know that I have marked all the nodes from that particular node to the root, so I don't need to go any farther. So what I do is I mark all these nodes as affected, and I just keep going to the parents and incrementing the number of nodes which are affected. Now I know that the total number of nodes is 2 to the k minus 1. So the number of nodes which are not affected would be 2 to the k minus 1 minus the number of affected nodes, and as I already told, I can just simply add 4 raised to the power number of not affected nodes to my answer, and this is what I am doing here. Now with that done, let's define what I do in the DFS function. So this is my DFS function, and what I am doing is so if I come at a node which is already which is not affected, then that means I don't really need to go further down below, and this entire line takes care of the part where I remove all the nodes which are not getting affected, right? So if you come at a node which is not getting affected, you simply return, because you know that all the nodes in its subtree are also not getting affected. So this way you can just reduce the size of your tree from 10 raised to the power 18 to 10 raised to the power 5, right? So you do that, and then you call the DFS function for both of its children, and with that done, now you do something special. So the first case is so you keep an allow vector, and in this allow vector you'll add all the nodes which can, all the colors which my particular current node can have, right? So if my current node has a tree value of 2, which means it is predefined, then that means only one color is allowed to be present here, which is the color of current node. And if that is not the case, then I can put any color from the first 6 colors, and there is no restriction. So my allow is just a vector containing 6 values from 1 to 6. Now this is the case 1 which I was talking about. This is case 2, and finally this is case 3. Also we can't keep a vector as a DP array or a simple array, because again the indexes of the nodes can be huge. So I'm just keeping an unordered map of unordered maps. That way I can create a 2D DP array. And yeah, so the first case is when both the children are affected, that is their tree values are greater than 0. Then I iterate for which color to put on the current node, and then I iterate two values j and k, which are from the allowed list of I. And what I do is I simply add to dp kernode I the product of dp first child j and dp second child k, right? And this is case 2, where I simply add to dp kernode of I dp first child of dp first child of j. And if the second child is unaffected, then I add to dp kernode of I dp second child of j, right? And the third case is when I'm at a predefined node, then there is really nothing left to do here. All I do is I just do dp kernode and the color of the kernode to be 1, and all the other dp values for this node are going to be 0. So this way I can solve problem E2. Finally what I do is I add all the values of dp1i from I going from 1 to 6 and multiply that with 4 raised to the power number of nodes which are not affected, and that is going to be my answer, right? So this completes the solution to problem E2. That was a really difficult problem for me to solve, and I hope you really got to learn something from it. So the key things to learn were how to apply 2D DP on trees, and how to actually make a DP array when the indexes can be huge. You can do it using an unordered map. And all in all, it was a really nice problem. So that is going to be it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed and got to learn something new, and thank you so much for sticking to the end. Bye bye.